Brendan and Marc, welcome to Bullseye. Welcome back to Bullseye. Marc, it's nice to see you guys inside of the Zoom screen here.
Thanks, Jess.
Thanks, Jesse.
Brendan, have we ever seen each other's faces before?
I mean, I've seen your face quite a lot, but we have never
Wow.
talked face to face. No, that's true. But I was thinking about that today. I have talked to you digitally so much that I feel like I have talked with you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously all of our listeners have seen me in the pages of Tiger Beat, but they haven't produced radio shows with me before. What do you remember, Brendan? I'm going to start with you because I know Marc is going to get his in. What do you remember as your initial impressions of Marc when you met him?
Oh, well, the initial impression was, is that Marc Maron? Because we were in a big ballroom. I forget what the hotel was, but it was the launch of Air America Radio. And I had no idea who was working there other than Al Franken and Janine Garofalo. And I knew that who Liz Winstead was without knowing her specifically. I just knew like co-creator of The Daily Show. And this was, this project that was being launched to kind of counter right-wing talk radio. I was a producer for public radio in New York City, WNYC. And one of the news anchors I worked with, she brought me over to Air America. She said, I think you would be good at this new place that's starting up. And so that was all I knew. I didn't know what I was going to be doing there. I didn't know what hour of the day I was going to be working. But I showed up and they were like, you're on the morning show. And I was like, that was the last thing I wanted to hear. And they put me with this collection of people who were also going to be working on it. And I saw Marc standing around, talking to people. And I knew him. I know people, I know comedians. I knew him from Comedy Central. I was aware of that guy, Marc Maron. But then they said, you're going to be working with these hosts. And he was one of them. And he was super intense right away, very close to my face. Like, who are you? What are you all about? And I was like, I'm a guy. I work on the radio. And I was, I wouldn't say I was intimidated, but I was just like, okay, this guy's a pretty raw dog. Like, we're gonna have to figure this one out a little bit. But I don't know. It kind of all came together pretty quickly after that. My impression then, once I actually could make one, was, oh, this guy's in it. Like, he wants to do this. It wasn't I wasn't worried that he was just some comedian who was thrown into something he wasn't going to be capable of doing. I knew pretty early on that he wanted to do it and he was going to be good at it.
Marc, do you remember that ballroom?
Oh, yeah. I remember that night. I entered that whole world ready to go, but I didn't feel like I was sort of politically astute enough to really kind of do what was necessary. So there's a lot of insecurity. There was a lot of unknowns. But I remember Sam Cedar. I knew Cedar, and he was very funny that night. I still remember it as being the most brilliant thing that he might have ever done. Because, here we were each going up there to talk about being involved with Air America and how it's the voice of the left going against the right. And Sam went up there to talk, and he pretended like he had laryngitis. It was so funny. And I remember meeting Brendan at that time, but I the more stronger memory about Brendan is when we started working. And he was an associate producer, and Dan Pashman was associate producer. Jonathan Larson was the producer. And all these guys looked so clean cut to me. I was like, what have I gotten into?
You thought we were conservatives. You were like, is this a scam?
Yeah, because Pashman had the Haldeman haircut. He had that he had that flat top. And all I could think was I haven't seen that haircut since pictures of Haldeman. And and you were just kind of you seem like all pretty normal guys, but I'm a rogue. I grew up feral, in the comedy world, and I'm walking into this place where there's these really smart guys that all look pretty conservative. I obviously didn't think you were politically conservative, but I definitely knew you had your together. And I was just out of my mind all the time. But I remember meeting Brendan, and I remember feeling like he just said. I remember him kind of looking at me like, all right, so what are we going to do with this guy? I don't know if we're going to get this one harnessed.
I mean, Marc, you must have done hundreds of hours of radio in your life, even before you became a radio host as a stand-up comic. I mean, one of the things stand-ups did, and to some extent still do, is when they have a weekend booked in the city on that Friday, or sometimes Thursday, if they have a Thursday night show, they'll have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go do, Wallaby and the Big Man.
Well, yeah, that's true. I don't know if it's hundreds of hours. I don't have a sense of that time, in terms of maybe. I mean, I've done a lot of that, and to be honest with you, it was one of the reasons why I wanted to do Air America. I mean, I always like doing morning radio. If it's a good crew, it's great and it's fun. And I knew that going into Air America, that there are certain morning crews that I would do, every year, where, I mean, it was hard to get up. But if they were in it and they were kind of like not trying to undermine me, getting into the groove with a good morning crew is a blast. Because, and what I learned from doing it is that there's so much riding on it. You don't want someone to come in there and kind of like crap out your show. And comedians, by and large, don't have a great reputation for doing morning radio because they've been up all night, or they're exhausted, or they don't care. So a lot of these hosts are a little kind of tenuous about how it's going to go. But I can talk. So if they're jiving on something and we get going, I thought it was completely engaging and a lot of fun. And again, as you know, from the Bay Area, when I lived there early on, I did a lot of Alex Bennett. This was the waning years of Alex Bennett, where he would just basically talk about, like not feeling good and, complaining about things. But, it would be me and 3 other comics, and you just try to kind of do that. That was a little more challenging. But when it's good, it's great. And one thing I learned by doing Air America is I had a profound empathy for these morning show crews, because if you get a dud of a guest and you've got a momentum going, it's a bummer. And it's like, and it's a show ruiner. And, you kind of have to regroup after that, because it's all about pace, and it's all about, not falling asleep. And, these are people that are up, they've sacrificed a normal life to do that job. And, you want to get into the groove. And I was always aware of that when I learned how to do it at Air America.
I did morning radio briefly when I was just out of college.
Uh-huh.
And I couldn't do it physically because of my migraines. I just couldn't handle the getting up early in the morning. I was getting a migraine every day. But one of the hosts, you weren't supposed to make eye contact with before she went into the studio. That was like a rule that was like explicitly said to me. And at the time, I don't think, not unreasonably, I was like, come on, give me a break. But now, when I think back on it, and I think about the job that she had to do at that time of day, the intensity and liveness of it, I just thought, probably somebody engaged her in a conversation about what kind of coffee she wanted in the break room when she was about to go in and talk about Survivor or whatever. And it messed up everything. And they just had to say, well, I guess we have to have a rule.
Yeah. Well, it's crazy, man. I mean, the intensity of it, and we were getting up much earlier than like just average morning crews, because we had to, kind of collate the news. So we were getting up at 2:30, getting there by 3 sometimes. And, and I was overwhelmed because I'm not a wonk. I'm a little out of the loop. I learned a lot there. I literally showed up at Air America with a Democracy for Dummies book because I felt like I was at a disadvantage. And that's true. And Brendan will tell you this story about Pashman used to crunch all the news and put it in a packet. That was like 30 or 40 pages of news stories. And what was it? What happened? He put it on my desk like day one.
You were in a conference room getting ready to do, we were not even on the air yet.
Yeah.
It was practice shows. And I think this was the first practice show that we were treating like a real show, like come in at the time we should come in and do the whole procedure. And then it just wasn't actually going on the air. It was a dummy show.
Right.
And you were in a conference room with a, large oak table so you could spread stuff out. And like, I saw you through the door in there, like from the back, and I could tell the way you were hunched over and just like I didn't have to see your face. I knew you were just like exasperated and frustrated. And it was just probably scared and confused and all of the emotions.
Yeah.
And so Dan, who's, very, even at 2:30 in the morning, 3:00, is a very kind of plucky, energetic guy. If you've listened to the Sporkful, Dan. And he walked in there with his packet that he'd been producing for several hours, and he put it down next to Marc, and Marc's like, "What is this?" I can't read all of this. Just like full volcano rising. And Dan was like, no, it's just for you. It's whatever you want to use it for. I don't want it. I don't want it at all. So that was the first day we started doing the show. We kind of made an adjustment after that.
It was so overwhelming, and it was so weird to be up at that hour, and the process of, and I was trying to maintain a marriage, across country, and I would call her at 3 in the morning or 2:30, because she'd be going to bed. It was all insanity. But I used to have the driver stop. I would get 2 large Dunkin' Donuts coffees and a bag of M&Ms that I would start munching on. I'd do the coffees, and I'd be eating M&Ms and drinking Dunkin' Donuts coffee, starting at 6 in the morning just to get myself into a kind of manic state. And I was out of my mind, man.
Marc, I like the idea that you had a plan to get yourself into a kind of manic state. Like,
yeah.
I would think just like having to do that thing, being in a room sometimes is enough to get you into that state.
Well, yeah, but not at 3 in the morning, dude, and not at 6 in the morning. I think that's true. And you do kind of adjust to the schedule, but never really adjust to it. And I really had to blast my brain, with sugar and caffeine. And that went on every day. I don't know what kind of damage I did to myself, but it was really just M&Ms and Dunkin' Donuts coffee. Once it started to get going, and once Brendan, I think, who was, the middleman between me and the seemingly to me evil Jonathan Larson, that there were these expectations about how I should do it. But there was a breakthrough at some point where, once the load of me having to talk about politics, which I thought I had to do in a sophisticated way, which was not really my bag and wasn't possible, but I tried. And there was a lot of informing me through the mic, and Jonathan Larson was always in my ear telling me what to do. And it became very unnerving. But once I broke out of that and just started talking about my life and what I was going through with the cats or with whatever I was doing, it really it opened up a whole other world for me. And, and then we had 3 hosts, and then one was gone, and then it was just me. I eventually became the driver of that show, and I leaned on my co-host Mark Riley to sort of do the news parts, and for me to just kind of chime in and talk about other things and move the comedy along. But that was a real game changer. I remember the monologues that probably made Brendan realize that that I was good on these mics in the way that later became what we do, and that's really where I found my voice.
I've taken sort of a mishmash of things that would give me hope. I have here an unopened fortune cookie. I have here an article that says the Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke says that everything's going to be okay towards the end of 2009. I'm not even going to read the article today. All right, that's where I'm at. Not even going to read it. Okay, Ben, thanks. That made me feel good right now. I have another article here. A guy in Georgia had both his hands cut off because of a bacterial infection, which is vague in this article. But apparently, they performed the first successful hand transplant on both his hands. Now, there's a couple things that are going on there. One is, it makes me feel good to know that if I lost a hand, maybe I have some other guy's hand. But and sometimes where they put someone else's heart in someone else's body, and all of a sudden that person wants cheeseburgers and they never liked cheeseburgers? Well, I'm just wondering, we're going to see how those hands act. But I'm just saying, who knows? But I am saying that makes me optimistic that they might be able to replace my hands or my head for that matter. I refuse to take medication, but I'm more than willing to have my head replaced.
Brendan, do you remember seeing Marc, somebody you knew as a comic, figure out how to be on the radio?
Yeah, it was pretty instantaneous, frankly, because I think mostly due to the kind of compromised way that all of the Air America shows were set up. Like, they were not set up with broadcasting intent in mind. They were like these weird chemistry tests of all these hosts and politicos, and it was not an ideal way to kind of set up one show, let alone 5 or however many they started with their slate. I can remember sitting in the hallway with Jonathan Larson and Dan Pashman and probably some other people who were kind of creatively involved with the network. And Jonathan was just like, what do we think? This was prior to launch, and we had been doing test shows and practice runs. And Jonathan was like, what do we think? What's working about this? And I remember I was the first to speak, and I said, I can tell you what's working. It's Marc Maron. And I can tell you what's not working is that we're not using Marc Maron. Like, that's the guy. Like, we should be focusing this around him. He's got the connection to, and that just was obvious to me, probably just because of my own preferences of how the show was sounding. I was interested when he was talking. And then as he said, it evolved as he was on the mics and as we were seeing what reaction certain things got from the audience. We still, to this very day, if Marc does something on the monologue on the podcast that is similar to what he's talking about with those lentils, where it's, halfway kind of this like fever dream, explanation of like a weird absurdist story, and then half of it is like looking for advice about how to cook lentils, we will get so much more reaction than any guest we have or any kind of underlying controversial material. It's always that lifestyle stuff that causes the most connection.
You guys were fired from Air America twice. Like, Air America just went through a lot of changes over its relatively short life. The last version of being on air at Air America, Marc, was you and Sam Cedar hosting a live streaming web show for a while. The second time that you got fired from Air America, Marc, did you have any hesitation about sticking around in audio?
No, I mean, I went back to audio because streaming certainly wasn't happening then. And there was, this new thing. So oddly, I was ready to go. I mean, because when we were still in the offices, because they let us stay there, I was like, I said to Brendan, do you think we can do this? And he was like, yeah, let's do it. Because podcasting was fairly new. There weren't that many there. I knew it existed, and I knew things were possible there. And it was my idea, I think, to do it, wasn't it?
You asked me if I was interested in doing it with you. And because I was probably unknown to you, a podcast fan, I was like, giddy up. I'm ready to do this.
Did you guys have a plan? Did you have a meeting?
Yeah, we had a plan to do a new show every Monday and Thursday. That was it.
Yeah, and it was like a kind of fun, organic planning session for about a month. I remember going to Marc's apartment in Astoria. We just kind of sit around and toss around like people we could wind up talking to, ideas. We really wanted to do a radio show. It wasn't so much like, okay, get ready, you're going to start interviewing people. It was more about like, let's do the Marc Maron podcast. And what does that entail? What are all the kind of things that make Marc entertaining, that will make this a thing that delivers for really the people we thought we'd deliver for were the 1,000 or so folks who were tuning into that stream. And we thought if we could keep them around and give them something, because they showed some loyalty and an enjoyment of this show that we had been doing. Let's do that. Let's do this for them. And maybe some other people from the old Air America days who dropped off. And we figured a few thousand people, that'd be great. That'd be great for Marc's mailing list. He'd get people to shows. He'd maybe build a draw again on the road. That was really the plan.
Marc, were you worried about building your draw then?
Well, I didn't have a draw ever. So like, it was really a matter of like, I had nothing going, and I had gotten back on my feet financially after the divorce, but I didn't, I wasn't a known guy. Air America didn't bring me nothing in terms of a draw, really. All those Conans. I did not have a draw. When we started the podcast, it wasn't great. So, I was looking down the barrel at, being a B-room headliner for the rest of my life.
For folks who don't know, like, you had a very well-established reputation. You had an act, you could headline. That's the kind of thing that you're talking about. And because you had credits in a comedy club there's a certain audience that comes for comedy and they want to trust that the comic is a professional comic. But at that time, especially if you just had, I've been on these late night shows, which you had, I've been on Comedy Central, which you had, then you can headline, but that audience that comes isn't necessarily your audience. And maybe you're talking about wanting to have an audience that comes to see you rather than comes to see comedy because they're a bachelorette party.
Right. But even what you're talking about, those days had sort of passed. This was not, the heyday of comedy in a lot of ways. I mean, even the sort of like people just coming for a comedy show was not, it was limited. So you really had to be able to sell tickets to get quality club work. And I couldn't sell tickets for whatever reason.
And as great of a comic as you are, you might not be the ideal choice for a generic audience.
No, of course not. When we started the podcast, I just wanted to stay out there somehow because I didn't have anywhere to go. I wasn't getting acting roles. I couldn't get booked as a comic that much. I had made enough money back from the divorce through Break Room to kind of sustain myself. And, but what was driving me was not so much I got to build a draw. It was like, I have to stay in the game somehow. And this is the game we're in now.
When and how, Brendan, did it become an interview show?
It was very gradual, and we had interviews from the very first episode, but it was more the idea of like an interview, like, I don't want to say it was like late night panel, 10 minutes or that, but it was really just like, let's get some other comics in here who Marc can bounce off of, and they'll do however much they want. That was the great freedom of it being a podcast. Do whatever you want. You want to talk to somebody for a half hour? Great. You want to talk for 5 minutes? Great. And so it kind of evolved from that. I mean, was there a point where I remember thinking, this is now an interview show? I don't know. I guess like it's probably more retroactive that I think that we, kind of circle like the Robin Williams episode, which happened like around, 6 months in, and you could go, okay, that was a big deal.
So I appreciate you doing this, and
it's fun.
I was nervous.
I
was nervous coming up here.
Why?
I usually don't get nervous.
Why?
I don't know why, because we've hung out before, we've talked before, but then at some point in my mind, I'm getting ready to do this, and I'm like, I felt like I was interviewing a former president. I'm going.
I never knew.
It's going to be like the Williams Maron interviews. These are going to be. This is going to go on for days.
What phone call?
Exactly.
What did I do? There's a blackout. I remember.
At the time, it didn't feel like we were ever saying this is going to be about the interviews. It just grew that way.
Yeah, because like the monologue, that all evolved out of me being insecure about people not knowing I was a comic. And so the monologue at the beginning, I remember we engaged a couple of the writers from back in the day that maybe we could get some jokes going and figure out some segments. And what that afforded me over time was that like I didn't have to be funny. I mean, I could just talk. But the initial reason for the monologue at the beginning was to make sure people knew that I was a comic. And then it just became this other thing that gave me a lot more of an expansive approach, that I could talk about anything. And then we do the interview. So it was sort of a mixture of things. And I think Brendan usually says that, from the beginning, this was a show about me, despite the fact that we were interviewing people.
So now I've got a deaf black cat eating out of this bowl who doesn't even know I'm there, making noises to scare him away. And then he looks up at me and his eyes are all cross-eyed and off and his face is a little twisted. It was like a David Lynchian cat. I had this moment where I sort of slipped into some weird waking dream state because of the creepiness of this deaf, cross-eyed black cat eating out of my cat's bowl. And I, for some reason in that moment said, what does this mean? This can't be good. This creepy cat was sent from the underworld to deliver a message, and I can't figure out what it is. And I got to go to the doctor tomorrow.
I remember those days very vividly. People would talk to me about WTF because it was like my show, but more successful. It was like if they were familiar with my show. And they would always say, oh, those interviews are incredible. I hate the monologue.
Yeah.
And there were certainly people who loved the monologue. I want to be clear about that.
Well, it all turned eventually.
Yeah, but like you guys were very clear that you were keeping the monologue. Like on the show, it was very clear this is central to what this show is, even if you people who are here for the drama of the conversations are mad that you have to listen to Marc first.
Yeah. I mean, well, I wasn't going to let it go. And there was, I don't know that we had discussions ever about I don't even think it was a discussion. I did know that people there was a running joke that people skipped the first 10 minutes, but oddly over the years, that changed to the point where people listened to them. That was why they were tuning in. So it was really a matter of like anything else, like any kind of a irascible radio personality is like they're an acquired taste. But most of the people that listened consistently began to listen for the monologue more than the interview.
I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that the show would not have had the longevity and the success that it had if we had at some point in the early stages of doing the show decided, well, there doesn't need to be a monologue. It'll just go right to the interview. I fully believe that. And it's because I know the floor of our audience, right? I have a very specific understanding of the fewest amount of people that will listen to any given episode. And it has always remained fairly strong. And I attribute that entirely to the connection that people have with Marc, meaning they will listen to any episode. It doesn't matter who the guest is. It doesn't matter if they know the person or don't know the person. It doesn't matter really any of it.
Years ago, I worked for a little bit with this guy in public radio in Santa Cruz where this show started. And he had come from commercial radio. He worked on the Michael Savage show, which was a hot talk show out of San Francisco.
Yeah.
And he took a job in public radio because, he liked public radio and he wanted to work in public radio because it was nice. And eventually he quit and he went back to the Michael Savage show. And I asked him why he did that because he had told me very convincingly his reasons for wanting to work in public radio. And he said, well, I mostly just get Michael Savage's newspapers. I don't have to be in the same room with him. They pay me $250,000 a year, and I'm the only one that can put up with him. Which, having heard Michael Savage on the radio, I'm not surprised to hear that. But I wonder, Brendan and Marc both, if you ever felt like your relationship was, gosh, I guess I found the person who can put up with me or the person I can put up with. Like if you are somehow have a special pairing in that way.
It was more just like, I found a guy I work well with, which I think a lot of people, if they're in a collaborative work environment, they feel like there's usually a person that they can work well with. And I just think that was always how it was for me and him, but he might see it differently.
No, I think at times I know I'm a lot to put up with, and I do appreciate the fact that you've got to listen to me more than anybody. But I think the foundation of the relationship was really a mutual respect for each of our respective jobs. It's been the longest relationship I've had. Look, I've had personal conversations with him about where I'm at, and I respect his input. But it's not the way we work. And I think because of the mutual respect and the sort of admiration for each other's work and our work ethic too. I mean, it's just, oddly a healthy relationship, which is not something, I'm really known for. but somehow him and I, because of our work ethic and because we're the only ones doing this and just because of what we came through in radio and everything else, and just because of my respect for his intelligence and everything else, there's never been any putting up with. I misread his text sometimes, but that's me.
I'm glad you used the word admiration, Marc, because I have talked to you about Brendan without Brendan in the room, virtually or literally.
Yeah.
That is the word that I would use to describe the way that you talk about Brendan. I think gratitude also. I think whenever I hear you talk about Brendan, I can hear you being grateful that you have a partner that you trust so much. Admiration is not like too big of a word to use about how I've heard you talk about Brendan to me.
Well, I think like whatever Brendan's talking about, talking circles around. It's like the truth is that you don't stay in a relationship, working or otherwise, for 20 years plus now, one way or the other, without it having some depth to it. It's just we're pretty well guarded guys, but we have a pretty deep relationship that it just is what it is. I mean, we don't have to get all teary eyed about it, which I'm prone to, but
it would help me if you guys did. That would be a real boon to me in this show.
But it's kind of
it's really worked great for WTF. I've never been able to generate it on my show, so if you guys could pump that element up a little bit.
No, it's a very moving thing, and it's a very, difficult thing to, the way it's all evolved and the fact that we've, maintained professionalism without, giving up a sort of caring for each other, in a real way, I know that look, he had to take a call from me, saying my girlfriend died. He's been there for me throughout all these different parts of my life. I don't really have a family structure or that many people to go to. And despite the fact that, he doesn't necessarily want to put that on me with his life, and I respect that, he's always been there for me all right, so you got it. He's always been there for me, in all ways. And, you got to appreciate that. But it's not fundamentally, like a regular friendship, because it is rooted in professionalism. But you can't underestimate the depth of the dynamic. Did we stop circling?
How do you feel hearing that, Brendan?
I mean, like, obviously, the appreciation goes both ways, and it wouldn't work without that. But the gratitude really does too. And I think that that's a big reason why maybe I don't intellectualize it too much, because I mean, like, Jesse, how do you think of someone? I'm sure there's people in your life, and I don't mean like your immediate family, but like there's probably people in your life that you're like, that person changed my life. Like, forever, like changed my life. And it might be someone you don't know personally, or it might be someone you know personally, but like, if I stopped and thought about that all the time, but like he and I have legit changed each other's lives permanently. And I don't know how you stop and just have a regular relationship then, and a working relationship, and one where you can just like be like, hey, did you watch that movie? Yeah, it was good. Like, I feel like most of your relationships in life stay on the ground. And this relationship is so elevated because we both literally would not be the people who we are today without it. We wouldn't have had the success we have. We wouldn't have the ability to lead the lives we live. We changed each other's lives for the better.
Were you each completely aligned in the decision to end the show?
Yeah, I mean, we had this agreement. It's a weird thing, and it also should be said that, in most of these situations, Brendan and I, from the get-go are, we're 50-50 partners in everything. So, my belief that this show doesn't exist without him, and the same on his side is obviously as well. And, our sort of commitment to...
And that's like, sorry to interrupt, Mark, but that's like literally true. Like, I've been in a room with an entertainment attorney to try and make a contract that says 50-50 partnership. And the entertainment attorney will be like, no, do not do that. Never, ever, 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 ever have a 50-50 partnership. At the very least, bring someone else in so there's 2 votes against 1.
Yeah, I don't know. We never thought that way, and it was never the one thing that we've earned and we relish in is the fact that no one can tell us anything. That we have complete control of all of it at all times.
But the reason is because if you're a 50-50 partnership, that means everyone has a veto.
And I will tell you, I did not take that lightly. Like when he said it, I thought that it was kind of crazy, and I don't think it's crazy now, but I did at the time think like, wow. I mean, like I would have easily taken 20 on this. It's like, he's the talent. Like, that's the way my brain worked around this. But because he trusted me, I've said this to other people. People say like, well, Marc, he's really changed from the guy he was when the podcast started. And I understand all the reasons why that's true. I understand all the reasons why people perceive that. But to me, it didn't change that much, because this is a guy who, when we were starting with nothing, said half of this is yours. Do not question it. That was extraordinarily generous, and a real vote of confidence, of faith, of taking someone who is, almost 2 decades his junior and trusting that person with, something this monumental, as it turned out, in his life. So like, I always took it very seriously. I think that it's a big reason why, Marc has this kind of compulsion to make sure he delivers on his end, no matter what. And I don't want to like discount my own work ethic, but I think a big reason why I felt an importance to deliver was to live up to that standard of 50%.
It was so funny when he finally came onto the show full time. I don't even remember when that was, because he was working in television production and consulting and whatnot, producing. And he said, "Look, I'm going to go on WTF full time." And I just remember, like, dude, don't do it, man. It's like, that's crazy. You have a family. I mean, don't, like, look, I lived the life of like a single weirdo. And he's like, I crunched the numbers. I'm not making a rash decision. Do you not know me? I'm like, all right, man, if you say so.
Why did you two never hire anyone else?
That's a good question.
Well, wait, but I want to know what you mean by hire. Like, we definitely have plenty of partnerships where people are doing work that, benefits us tremendously. And so do you mean just like, why did we never like expand the production element of the show?
Yeah. Why didn't you staff up at some point? You know what I mean? I'm not talking about like, why do you not have a publicist or whatever?
I know what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, the answer was what Marc gave just a few minutes ago, which is we always only wanted to kind of answer to ourselves on this.
And because of that, we overwork.
Yeah, that's true. But it's like, I just don't think I would have been okay with it another way. I think so much of what allowed us to keep this going the way we did, at the level we were able to keep it going, was to not have to stop and explain it to somebody, to not have to say, which in some way was inexplicable, here's the ethos behind this show. It was just something that was kind of understood between Marc and myself. And we've had plenty of, assistants. We've had people, who handle updating things on websites. We've had people who handle, being there in person to greet guests. And, that's the easy stuff to explain. But having someone else edit the show, that was just a non-starter, because it's as much something of just a kind of understanding Marc and I have about how this is going to sound as it is of just like what comes out of Marc's mouth when he's on the microphone. It's innate, it's within him, and it's going to come out. And it's the same way of how the show ultimately gets presented. So I don't think either of us ever wanted to be like, hey, let's expand. And now the show is multiple people, or, we can do, several shows a week, or, with different hosts. And it was just not part of our drive to do this. Like, ultimately, we're just guys who wanted to do the work we did.
For either of you, was there ever a time when you felt the partnership was tenuous?
No,
for real. Not the partnership. Definitely not. I mean, there were times where I wondered about like the show. I've been public about this, and I said, when the Me Too movement started in earnest, I wondered if we were, in some ways had blind spots to that was negative, and I wasn't feeling great about that. Basically meaning, were we kind of elevating people and in this kind of comedy situation? Oh, aren't these people hilarious and funny and great, and not really addressing the problems? But I think that we were able to talk through that.
Brendan, do you mean because part of what WTF was about a world in stand-up comedy where there was a lot of workplace harassment, and that if you celebrated the messy things about the practitioners that you might inadvertently have been or would be celebrating the harassment.
Yeah, or more accurately, I think from my own brain, it was like, did we think that because someone came on here and we had this idea that the show kind of helps reveal someone's authentic self, did we like kind of whitewash that, right? Did we paint over the negative aspects of that, or ignore them ourselves, right? And I think like Mark and I had conversations about that. We like went out of our way to like try to address that going forward with the type of guests we booked. And I like personally, I was able to kind of overcome what I thought was, a questionable route of like a fork in the road for the show. I would say the same thing was true during COVID. Like, are we going to just keep doing this over Zoom? Like one of the things we wanted to do from the start was have these live connections with people in a room. But we adapted to that, and it, we didn't continue doing it after people were back seeing each other face to face. We stopped doing over the screen remote interviews, but I was questioning whether or not we should do it. At no time, though, was it ever like a question about our partnership. It was like, can we have this conversation? And it's ultimately the same thing that led to the end of the show, was that we both said, let's have this conversation. I went out to LA with a date in mind, and I said, I'm going to come over on this day and we can talk about the future of the show. And I went over to Mark's house saying to myself, I'm going to tell him, I think we should be done. And he said the same thing. Like when I got over there, he said, so you want to talk about the show? I said, yeah, I mean, I'm interested to know like your thoughts about where we go with this in the future. And he was like, what are your thoughts? Like just turned it right around on me. Like I was not going to be able to back into that thing. And I said, well, if I had to, really plant my flag on this, I'd say we're done. And he right away, it wasn't like he had to give it some thought, said, I think so too. So like, that was to me, it's like we had these other times where we were like, we should have a conversation about the show. And it led to us continuing to do the show. And at that point, the conversation was, we should end the show. And we both felt okay about it. And we proceeded.
That was always the agreement too, was that, whoever said, I'm done, then the other would honor it. But the fact was, what he's not mentioning is, I would say, I don't know how long ago it was, a year or so, maybe more, that the reality of burnout, which is not something I could identify, but Brendan was able to identify. Like, Brendan was like, this is a real thing. And we went through a sort of period there where we were, it was compromising our lives, what was really just burnout. And I never really thought of that as a clinical kind of thing, that it's a real thing that has implications on the rest of your life. And we both identified that in ourselves a while ago. Yeah, I mean, before we decided to end the show. I would say there were talks about that, as we were negotiating the deal with Acast. That was the deal that we got, that we were experiencing periods of real burnout. And then we decided to soldier on, and I think making the deal with Acast brought new life into us, and a new sort of a goal, which was financial, which I think we both felt we had coming, for the work we put in, and now we were living it, and that kind of made us transcend what was feelings of exhaustion around what we were doing. And it wasn't even pushing through. It just brought new life to the show. But now as we're sort of coming to the end of that, we realize like, all right, well, we can do it now.
I know people who got tens of millions of dollars for their shows. It's not happening so much right now as it was happening 5 and 8 years ago.
Oh, it's done.
Did you ever consider selling the show, even if it meant, potentially you just becoming an employee? That's still a big difference in your life and could have been a big relief.
No.
It was never, I mean, this goes to Mark's joke about it's easy to maintain your integrity when no one is looking to buy it. And I don't think we ever got that kind of offer largely because what we talked about earlier, that that our decision to not build the show out beyond what it already is production-wise did not create for it a value beyond the brand, which is very strong, and the ability to put ads in the show, and the ability to monetize like a subscription service for and merchandising, that kind of stuff, which is all brand related. But these shows that you're talking about that got the huge deals, and as Mark correctly identified, those are vanishing. They started empires, and they were what they were essentially selling were networks, and we didn't have that, and so we weren't really offered that. We were offered always along the lines of what we wound up doing, which was partnership deals that involved ad sales and a kind of larger infrastructure for premium content or subscription-based content, or however you want to phrase it. And we were happy with that. We were like, that allows us to keep doing the type of show that we do, and we can move forward with that. I think one of the reasons we both looked at the landscape and said, it's probably time to hang it up, was we knew that the next deal, whatever that deal would be, would either involve lots of compromises that we had up until that point avoided, or a lot less money. And to me, it's not like I'm like, oh, I can't do this for, less money. It's more like I'm exhausted. So I feel like you should value your own output to the level of what like you've already been doing, right? And if that value is then less in the marketplace, well, then I should be done.
And also, Jesse, we're just by nature, neither Brendan or myself are greedy people or people that believe that means winning. So we did all right, and we did all right for, our lives. That's great. We're not greedy people. Our lifestyles are reasonable. We're not driven by that. We're driven by the integrity of the show and the quality at which we operate at. And our choice to remain in audio was because we appreciate audio and believe that it is the more intimate medium, and there is sort of a magic to it. And the fact that we kind of, with the deal that we got, we were able to say like, well, we earned this, and now we can, live our lives in a certain amount of comfort that is reasonable, without feeling we have to chase anything. And we're just not like that.
Mark, you have a successful acting career. You become a very good actor in addition to being a successful one. You have always defended your position as a stand-up comic. There was no point at which you backed off of being a stand-up. And I think if you had, written your own epitaph at any point, it would have started with stand-up comic.
Yeah.
Even at even at the most successful of WTF, or the most culturally current of WTF, whatever point that was,
right,
you still would have said, I'm a stand-up.
Yeah.
Brendan, you're the producer of WTF. You're not an actor or a stand-up or a filmmaker. So this is a bigger difference in your life in some ways.
Bigger in the sense that the change that what is that like a what's next question?
Look, Mark is giving up 40% of his career right now, maybe 60%, depending on how you see it, whether it's financial or, spiritual. You know what I mean?
Mm.
This
has been your life for the past 15 plus years.
You're asking basically, or you're saying to me basically what my son said to me. He said, "Are you sad about this ending?" I said, "What do you think?" And he said, "Yes, I think you're sad." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because your career is over." and I had to laugh. And I said to him, I don't think my career is over. And I'm not sad. I'm happy that we're getting to do this on the terms that we're getting to do it. And no, like, again, much like I do not take for granted Marc's offer to me when we started this of a 50-50 partnership. I do not take for granted how we're ending this. I am very grateful for how we're doing this. People do not get to choose most of the time. They get shown the door, and that's the end of that.
Or they fade away.
But the reality for me is like, I'm in the same position I was in now when we started WTF, which is that I can end this and I then do not have any expectations for what's next. And I'm also in a very secure place in my life that I can have that. And that's wonderful to me. I am not sad about that. I'm very happy that the next thing that's on my plate, whatever that might be, will come with zero expectations, zero pressure. It will just be an outgrowth of whatever I decide that I would like to do. And that's great. That was why we did this. Like, to me, I'm like, I'd like to get to a place in my life where I could just like be happy with what I do and I don't have to worry about what comes next.
Marc is a compulsive worker and a compulsive person in some other areas.
Yeah.
What's it going to be like for you not to have the signpost of those 2 episodes a week?
I don't know. Yeah, it's already sort of like showing itself in that, we don't have to, get a backlog of interviews in the can. So there's already been that space. And, right now, because of the weight of stopping it and the big change and the fact that I just dumped a special and, I'm kind of at square one with stand-up, it's a little rough. Every day's kind of an emotional roller coaster, but I'm aware of it and I'm, putting things in place. And also this show was, outside of Brendan and I's relationship in all ways, like it was a big part of my social life, talking to people and getting out of my head. And it was a big psychological and emotional and at times spiritual part of my life that was very consistent. And in having this time to plan the end, I've had to put some things in place, knowing that I'm going to be a little untethered. But I also know that I spent a good part of my professional life like that. Like I'm not heading into something unfamiliar. As a matter of fact, like Brendan was saying, there's a lot of things that are secure now that weren't. But I have spent large chunks of my life when I was just a comic with more time on my hands in a lonelier place, in a much different living environment, with a lot of dread and fear and not knowing, how I was going to continue to survive or move through the world. So that part of it is not there, but the emotional part of it is there, and the sort of creative, like, what do I do next? And my compulsion, lends itself to anything. Right now, I'm highly obsessed with a difficult cat situation and trying to figure out how to clear out all this crap from my life. It's somewhere I've been, but not as confident or, financially secure or, creatively sort of grounded. So not unlike Brendan, I don't know what'll happen. I do know I'm employed, with the television, but in terms of my own creativity outside of, doing someone else's, script, I'm trying to make the adjustment to, focus on pulling this movie together and working a little differently. But I do need to expand my social life and probably, get back to meetings. Just so, not that I'm worried I'm going to drink or use drugs, but just to get that emotional component of feelings, going on a regular basis.
I guess 15 or 17 or whatever it was years ago, I went over to your house to help you plug your microphones into your computer. If you guys aren't going to use those, do you think I could have them in case we need them? Just because we're not.
I have an unopened one. Shure sent me one with a built-in preamp. Do you want it?
No, it's okay. It's okay.
An SM7. I remember that when you told me to get the mics, I bought the wrong one. I bought an SM57, and that was definitely the wrong mic. But I use it now to record all the guitar at the end. That's the mic that I bought because I thought you meant an SM57, not an SM7. But I still have it, and it makes all the music.
Can I tell you something? As I was preparing for this interview, I was in my office in a shed in my backyard, and I looked over my shoulder, and my eye caught my trophy for being in the Podcast Hall of Fame,
Yeah.
which you're also in, Mark.
Yeah.
And this is one of the only accolades I've received since I won the Best Local Radio Personality in Metro Santa Cruz in 2003.
Yeah.
Very proud of it. And I thought to myself, I'm very proud of the work I've done and my contributions to podcasting. I don't think I would have that trophy on my wall if it weren't for Marc Maron compulsively thanking me on the air for showing him how to plug the microphones into his computer.
It was which microphone, and believe me, Shure is forever grateful. Because from you to me to God's ears, 80% of the podcasters use this mic.
Well, I want to say that as modest as my contributions were, 3 hours of my time or whatever decades ago, I just am always so grateful to you for giving me credit.
Always.
And it's meant such an oddly large amount in my career.
It was a big deal.
It's not nothing though, Jesse. I mean, it was the mics, but you also gave us your time and spoke to us about the host service that you were using at the time. That was the one we used.
Yep.
It was, we just had Jimmy Pardo over to do a conversation with Mark, and it was a similar thing. It was like, there was a community back then that we all kind of relied on each other to help feel out in the dark. What's going on with this thing? How do we do it? And, I'm always very grateful to everyone who was there in those days, even people who didn't do what you did and speak to us directly, just people who were there doing podcasts. We took from that. We took from everyone. It was all very fun and encouraging. And we definitely knew we were doing something that was like unique and growing, and let's just make the most of it. So I don't treat it as like we overpraised or anything. It was hugely important for us and everyone else in those, days in 2008, 2009, 2010, that we kind of all had each other's backs, even when we didn't think we did.
And if it weren't for the work that Brendan, you did, and Mark, you did, and that I did, and Jimmy Pardo did, we never could have had a podcast hosted by Barack Obama and Bruce Springsteen. That gift would have been withheld from the world. That's the least of the ones that you could
come up with.
Also, SM7s, buddy.
Yeah, SM7s. Brendan, Mark, thank you so much for coming back on Bullseye, and thanks for all these wonderful years of work that you've done. I'm so happy that they're in the world and will continue to benefit people for many years to come.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse.